What happens when a power-tripping flight attendant, fueled by years of unchecked prejudice, decides to publicly humiliate a passenger? What if that passenger, a quiet 17-year-old black girl sitting in first class, is seen as an easy target? On Global Voyager Airlines Flight 212 from New York to London, veteran attendant Brenda Jenkins thought she was just putting a disrespectful kid in her place. She didn't know her venomous accusation would ignite a firestorm that would not only halt the 300-ton Boeing 777 in its tracks, but would also unravel a web of corporate negligence and bring her entire world crashing down. This isn't just a story about a rude employee. It's about the catastrophic power of a single phone call and the day a teenager taught a multi-billion-dollar airline a lesson in respect. The hum of the Boeing 777's auxiliary power unit was a symphony of anticipation for Imani Hayes. At 17, she was already a prodigy, a coder fluent in 3 programming languages, and on her way to London to be the keynote youth speaker at the Future Innovators Tech Summit. This trip, this seat, 1A, a first-class suite with its own sliding door, was a surprise gift from her parents. "To our brilliant daughter," the card had read, "fly like the star you are. We are so proud of you. Love, Mom and Dad." Imani settled into the plush leather, the fabric cool against her skin. She ran her fingers over the polished wood grain console, her mind already racing with lines of code and the opening remarks of her speech. She was dressed comfortably but neatly in a dark grey sweatsuit from a respectable athleisure brand, her hair in intricate box braids pulled back into a high ponytail. On her lap sat a worn copy of Algorithms to Live By, its pages filled with her own annotations. To anyone paying attention, she was the picture of focused intelligence. But Brenda Jenkins wasn't paying attention to the details. She was scanning her first-class cabin with a sense of proprietary weariness. With 22 years at Global Voyager Airlines, Brenda saw the cabin not as a space for hospitality, but as her kingdom, and its passengers as subjects who were either compliant or problematic. Her eyes, sharp and critical, swept past the businessman in 2D, already barking into his phone, and the older couple in 3A and 3B quietly sipping champagne. Then they landed on Imani in 1A, and they stopped. Brenda's smile, a thin, professionally painted slash of coral lipstick, didn't waver, but her eyes tightened. A teenager, in the most expensive suite on the plane, dressed in a sweatsuit, and black. The mental checklist in Brenda's mind clicked through a series of ugly, ingrained assumptions, probably a credit card scam, or maybe a sponsored influencer who thinks the world owes them everything, definitely not supposed to be here. She glided down the aisle, her movements practiced and efficient. "Can I see your boarding pass, please?" she asked. Her voice was syrupy sweet, but held a metallic edge that Imani immediately detected. Imani looked up from her book, slightly startled. "Of course," she said, pulling up the digital pass on her phone and holding it out. Brenda barely glanced at it. Her eyes were fixated on the high-end, noise-cancelling headphones resting on the console next to Imani. They were standard issue for Global Voyager's first-class passengers. "Those headphones are for suite occupants only," Brenda stated, her tone shifting from questioning to accusatory. "You should have waited until we were in the air to take them out of the packaging." Imani blinked, confused. "They were already on the console when I arrived. I haven't touched them." Brenda hummed, a sound laced with disbelief. "It's just that we have a procedure. It prevents loss." The implication hung heavy in the recycled cabin air. She looked Imani up and down again, her gaze lingering on the casual attire. "I'll be taking these for now. I'll return them to you after takeoff." Without waiting for a response, Brenda plucked the expensive headphones from the console. The act was swift and dismissive, a clear assertion of dominance. Imani felt a hot flush of embarrassment creep up her neck. Several other passengers were now looking over, their curiosity piqued by the flight attendant's pointed attention. "Ma'am, that's not necessary," Imani said, keeping her voice even despite the tremor of anger she felt. "I'm not going to do anything with them." "It's airline policy," Brenda lied, her smile becoming a condescending smirk. "You wouldn't understand the complexities. Now, can I get you something to drink before we depart? Orange juice? Water?" The offer was a dismissal, a way of saying the conversation was over. Imani, feeling the weight of multiple pairs of eyes on her, simply shook her head. "No, thank you. I'm fine." As Brenda turned and walked away, headphones in hand, Imani's mind, usually occupied with logic and data, was now processing a different kind of algorithm, one of prejudice. She knew what had just happened. She wasn't just a passenger, she was a suspect. The excitement she'd felt moments before curdled into a cold knot of dread in her stomach. She pulled out her phone, not to reread her speech, but to send a quick text to her father, Marcus Hayes. "Boarded. In my seat. Having a bit of a weird issue with one of the flight attendants. It's fine for now, just wanted to let you know." His reply came back almost instantly. "Weird how? Do you need me to do anything?" Imani hesitated. She was a problem solver. She could handle a rude flight attendant. She typed back, "No, it's okay. I'll handle it. Don't worry. Love you." She put her phone away, took a deep breath, and tried to focus on her book, but the words on the page blurred. Brenda's actions had planted a seed of discord, and in the pressurized environment of an airplane cabin, that seed was about to sprout into something monstrous. Brenda, for her part, felt a surge of satisfaction. She'd put the girl in her place, asserted her authority. In her mind, she hadn't been prejudiced. She'd been proactive. And it was this profound, dangerous self-deception that would set the stage for the chaos to come. The boarding process continued, and the first-class cabin filled with the low murmur of conversations and the clinking of glasses. Imani tried to will herself back into her pre-flight bubble of excitement, but the encounter had left a bitter taste. She watched as Brenda catered to the other passengers with practiced charm, offering warm towels and refilling champagne flutes, her laughter light and professional. The contrast was stark and deliberate. When Brenda passed by seat 1A, she wouldn't even make eye contact. About 10 minutes before the cabin door was scheduled to be sealed, a man in a tailored suit, Mr. Peterson from seat 2D, flagged Brenda down. "Excuse me, miss," he said, pointing to his own console. "My headphones seemed to be missing. They weren't here when I sat down." Brenda stopped. A slow, triumphant smile spread across her face. This was it. The confirmation she needed. Her internal narrative clicked into place. The girl in 1A didn't just touch her headphones early. She had clearly taken the ones from 2D, thinking no one would notice. Instead of following standard procedure, checking the storage bins, asking the ground crew, or simply getting a replacement set, Brenda saw an opportunity. She turned, her body angled not towards Mr. Peterson, but directly at Imani. She didn't walk, she stalked. She stopped right in front of Imani's suite, her presence blocking the aisle. Her voice, no longer syrupy, was loud enough for the entire front cabin to hear, slicing through the quiet ambience. "Okay, honey, the game is over," Brenda said, her voice dripping with condescension. "We have a passenger missing his headphones, and I think we all know where they went." Imani's head snapped up. Every passenger in first class was now staring. The businessman, the elderly couple, A woman in a Chanel blazer. All eyes were on her. The humiliation was a physical force, pressing in on her. "I have no idea what you're talking about," Imani said, her voice quiet but firm. "You took my headphones from my console 30 minutes ago." "Oh, I took the headphones that were at your seat," Brenda retorted, her voice rising in pitch and volume. "But I'm talking about the ones from seat 2D, the ones that mysteriously vanished right before you were the only one sitting in this section." She leaned in closer, invading Imani's personal space. "Look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Just hand them over, and we can forget this whole embarrassing incident." "There is nothing to hand over," Imani insisted, her own anger now beginning to burn through her composure. "I haven't left my seat since I boarded. You're making a false accusation." The word accusation seemed to enrage Brenda. To her, this wasn't an accusation, it was a fact. Her authority was being challenged by a child. "Don't you dare take that tone with me!" Brenda's voice was no longer just loud, it was a shout. Her face was flushed, her coral lipsticked mouth twisted in a snarl. "I have had it with entitled young people who think they can get away with anything. You sneak into a first-class cabin where you clearly don't belong, and then you start stealing property. I am a senior crew member on this aircraft, and I will not be disrespected." The cabin was dead silent, save for Brenda's heaving breaths. Mr. Peterson from 2D looked horrified. "Ma'am, hold on," he started. "I didn't mean to cause all this." But Brenda ignored him. Her focus was entirely on Imani, who sat frozen, the blood having drained from her face. It was one thing to be suspected, another to be publicly flayed by a torrent of baseless, vitriolic assumptions. The injustice of it was breathtaking. "I'm going to ask you one last time," Brenda spat, her finger now pointing directly at Imani's face. "Where are the headphones? Are they in your bag? In your pockets?" Tears pricked at the corners of Imani's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give this woman the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Her mind, trained to find logical solutions under pressure, began to work. Arguing was futile. This woman was irrational. She was operating on a level of pure, unadulterated bias. There was no protocol for this, no algorithm for de-escalating raw prejudice, so she had to create a new one. She held Brenda's furious gaze. Her voice, when it came out, was chillingly calm. It didn't waver. It didn't crack. "You are creating a hostile and unsafe environment," Imani said, each word precise and deliberate. "You have publicly accused me of theft without a shred of evidence. You have yelled at me in front of an entire cabin. You have violated your airline's own code of conduct. And you have done all of this." She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle. "Because you looked at me and decided I didn't belong here." Brenda recoiled as if struck. The calm, factual indictment was more effective than any scream or cry would have been. "You have no idea who you're talking to," Brenda hissed, though a flicker of uncertainty now crossed her face. "No," Imani replied, a quiet confidence solidifying in her chest. "You have no idea who you're talking to." With a steady hand, Imani reached for her phone. She ignored the gasps from the other passengers. She ignored Brenda's shocked, angry expression. She scrolled to a single contact in her phone, a name saved under a simple, powerful title. Dad. She pressed the call button. The line connected in less than a second. "Dad," she said, her voice still perfectly level. "It's Imani. I'm on Global Voyager 212 at JFK, Gate C42. The situation has escalated. I need you to listen very carefully." Brenda stared, her mouth agape. She thought the girl was calling her mommy to complain. She was about to learn that this single phone call was not a plea for help. It was a command, and it was about to bring the full, crushing weight of the corporate world down upon them all. Marcus Hayes was in his home office, a sleek, minimalist space overlooking the East River. On his desk were 3 monitors displaying logistics data, market analytics, and a live feed of global air traffic. As the Executive Vice President for Global Operations and Safety Compliance for Orion Holdings, the multi-billion-dollar parent conglomerate that owned Global Voyager Airlines, Marcus's world was a complex tapestry of protocols, regulations, and crisis management. When his daughter's name flashed on his private line, he answered immediately, a smile on his face. The smile vanished as he heard the tension in her voice. "The situation has escalated," Imani said. "I need you to listen very carefully." Marcus swiveled in his chair, his entire focus narrowing to the phone. He could hear the faint, muffled sounds of a plane cabin in the background. "I'm listening, sweetheart. Tell me everything. Are you safe?" "I am physically safe," Imani replied, her voice a testament to the composure he and his wife had worked so hard to instill in her. "But I have been publicly accused of theft by a senior flight attendant in front of the entire first-class cabin. Her name is Brenda Jenkins. She is shouting. She confiscated my issued headphones earlier under a false pretense and is now accusing me of stealing another passenger's set." Marcus's knuckles whitened as he gripped a pen on his desk. He wasn't just a father hearing his child was in distress. He was a senior executive hearing about a catastrophic failure of service and a massive potential liability. "Okay, Imani," he said, his voice dropping into the calm, authoritative tone he used when managing mid-air emergencies. "Keep her there. Do not engage with her further. Just stay on the line with me. Can you do that?" "Yes, Dad." Brenda, who had been watching this exchange with a mixture of scorn and confusion, finally found her voice. "Who are you calling? Your mother? It's too late for that. We're about to close the cabin door, and you are going to be dealing with airport security, not your parents." Imani simply held the phone to her ear, her gaze fixed on Brenda, and said nothing. Marcus was already typing with his other hand. He pulled up the flight manifest for GV212. He saw Imani's name. He pulled up the crew roster. He saw Brenda Jenkins, senior flight attendant, employee ID 74B92. He pulled up her file. 22 years of service, a handful of minor passenger complaints over the years, all dismissed by a mid-level manager named David Chen. A red flag. He minimized that window and placed another call on his computer's integrated system, keeping Imani on his cell phone. The call went directly to the private line of Robert Sterling, the chief pilot for Global Voyager's East Coast division. It was a number few people had. Sterling answered on the first ring. "Marcus, what's going on?" "Robert, I have a code orange situation on your flight, GV212, currently at JFK Gate C42, Marcus said, his voice cold as ice. The term Code Orange wasn't an official FAA designation. It was Orion Holdings' internal classification for an imminent legal or PR disaster requiring immediate executive intervention. There was a sharp intake of breath on Sterling's end. "Understood. What's the nature of the incident?" "You have a senior crew member, Brenda Jenkins, engaging in what I can only describe as a discriminatory and abusive tirade against a minor passenger in first class. She has made a public accusation of theft without cause. The passenger is my daughter." Silence. For a full 3 seconds, Robert Sterling said nothing, processing the calamitous implications. The EVP's daughter, a minor, an accusation of racism. "My God, Marcus, There's no time for that, Robert," Marcus cut in, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I want you to get on the horn to the captain of that flight, Captain Reynolds, immediately. Instruct him to halt all pre-departure procedures. He is not to close the cabin door. He is not to communicate with the tower. He is to hold his position at the gate. A GVA station manager and a corporate legal representative are to meet the aircraft immediately. Is that clear? Crystal clear, Marcus. I'm on it now. One more thing, Robert. This crew member, Brenda Jenkins, is to have no further contact with my daughter. The purser is to be instructed to isolate her at the back of the aircraft until the station manager arrives. Done, Sterling said, already typing furiously. Marcus disconnected the call and toggled to another line, this time to Cynthia Marshall, the head of Global Voyager's legal department. He relayed the same information in clipped, precise terms. Cynthia, get a team to JFK Gate to C-42 now. We have a potential discrimination lawsuit, false accusation, and public harassment of a minor. I want statements from every passenger in that cabin. I want the flight crew sequestered. And I want Brenda Jenkins's employment and complaint history on my desk in the next 10 minutes. Back on the plane, the tension was unbearable. Brenda was beginning to realize this was not a call to a distraught mother. The calm, authoritative way Imani was holding the phone, the one-sided conversation she could partially overhear, it spoke of something else entirely. The other passengers were shifting uncomfortably, whispering amongst themselves. The lead purser, a younger man named Kevin, started walking towards the front, his face etched with concern. Just then, Captain Reynolds's voice crackled over the cabin PA system, not with the usual cheerful welcome, but with a tone of strained formality. Flight attendants and ladies and gentlemen, apologies for this. We've just received a directive from our operations control center. We will be holding our position at the gate for the time being. All pre-departure activities are to be suspended immediately. We will provide more information as soon as we have it. A wave of confusion rippled through the plane. Brenda froze, her hand halfway to the intercom to ask the captain what was happening. Her blood ran cold. The timing was too perfect, too precise. It couldn't be a coincidence. The purser, Kevin, reached her. "Brenda, what's going on up here?" he whispered urgently. Before she could answer, his own company-issued tablet pinged. He looked down, his eyes widening in shock. It was a direct message from the chief pilot's office. He looked from the tablet to Brenda, then to the composed young girl in seat 1A who was still on the phone. "Brenda," Kevin said, his voice barely audible. "You need to come with me, to the rear galley. Now." "I'm not going anywhere," Brenda snapped, her panic manifesting as defiance. "I'm handling a situation." "No," Kevin said, his tone now firm, echoing the authority that had just been passed down the chain of command. "You're not. The situation is handling you. Let's go." As Kevin began to escort a stunned and protesting Brenda down the aisle, the jet bridge, which had been pulled back in preparation for departure, slowly began to move back towards the aircraft door. The loud metallic thud, as it reconnected to the fuselage, sounded like a judge's gavel. The entire plane was officially on lockdown, and it was all because of the quiet girl in seat 1A, who finally lowered her phone and spoke softly to her father. "Okay, Dad," Imani said. "They're here." The sound of the jet bridge reconnecting sent a shockwave of whispers and speculation through the entire plane, from the first-class suites to the last row of economy. Phones were out, with passengers texting loved ones and business associates about the bizarre delay. "Trouble in first class," one text read. "They're holding the plane for something." For the passengers of flight GV212, this was an inconvenience, a frustrating delay. For Brenda Jenkins, it was the beginning of the end. She stood in the rear galley, flanked by the purser Kevin, who refused to meet her eye. Her bravado had evaporated, replaced by a gnawing, acid-like fear. 22 years of service, of ruling the aisles with an iron fist disguised as a velvet glove, and she had never experienced anything like this. Planes were delayed for weather, for mechanical issues, for medical emergencies. They were not held at the gate because a teenager made a phone call. The main cabin door hissed open. The sudden influx of fresh jet bridge air felt like a change in pressure, a sign that the controlled environment of the aircraft had been breached. Two figures stepped aboard, their expressions grim and purposeful. The first was Sarah Miller, the JFK station manager for Global Voyager Airlines. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her late 40s, dressed in a perfectly pressed GVA uniform. Her face was a mask of strained professionalism. Behind her was a man in an expensive but rumpled suit, carrying a worn leather briefcase. This was Jonathan Cole, a senior attorney from Orion Holdings' corporate legal department, who happened to be at the airport for a different matter. He had been rerouted by Cynthia Marshall's frantic call. Sarah Miller's eyes scanned the cabin, immediately finding Kevin. She strode towards the rear galley, her heels clicking with unnerving authority on the cabin floor. Jonathan Cole paused at the front, his gaze sweeping over the first-class passengers before landing on Imani in seat 1A. He gave her a subtle, almost imperceptible nod before turning his attention to the cabin at large. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cole announced, his voice calm but commanding, instantly silencing the murmurs. "My name is Jonathan Cole. I'm with the airline's corporate office. We are aware of an incident that occurred on board during boarding. As a result, this flight will be deplaned to allow us to resolve the matter. Please remain in your seats for now. We will begin the deplaning process from the rear of the aircraft shortly. We sincerely apologize for the disruption to your travel plans." A collective groan went through the cabin. A cancelled flight, the logistical nightmare of rebooking, hotels and missed connections descended upon the passengers. In the back galley, Sarah Miller faced Brenda. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words were colder and sharper than any shout. "Brenda Jenkins," she said, forgoing any pleasantries. "Your flight duties are suspended, effective immediately. You will hand over your company ID and all GVA property. You are to be escorted to an administrative office in the terminal, where you will give a full and complete statement regarding your interaction with the passenger in seat 1A. Brenda's face, already pale, turned ashen. Suspended? For what? For enforcing policy? For trying to secure company property? For what? Sarah's voice was incredulous. Brenda, the executive vice president of our parent company, Orion Holdings, personally called the chief pilot and ordered this plane grounded. His daughter is the passenger in seat 1A. So you can spare me the enforcing policy nonsense. What in God's name were you thinking? The name, executive vice president, hit Brenda like a physical blow. The world tilted on its axis. The girl in the sweatsuit, the quiet, polite teenager. Her father wasn't just some disgruntled frequent flyer. He was at the very top of the corporate food chain. He was a man who didn't just fly on the planes. He oversaw the entire global operation that kept them in the air. Brenda started to stammer, her carefully constructed reality crumbling around her. I didn't know. She looked. I thought. You thought what, Brenda? Sarah's voice was merciless. That a young black woman couldn't possibly belong in first class unless she was causing trouble. Is that what you thought? Brenda had no answer. The ugly truth of her own prejudice was laid bare under the harsh galley lights, and it was indefensible. While this confrontation was happening, Jonathan Cole approached Imani's seat. He knelt slightly to speak to her at eye level, his demeanor shifting from corporate enforcer to one of quiet concern. Miss Hayes, I'm Jonathan Cole. Your father asked me to come and see to you personally. On behalf of the airline, I want to offer our most profound and sincere apologies for what you have just endured. It is unacceptable, and I assure you, it will be handled with the utmost seriousness. Thank you, Imani said, her voice still quiet. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving a deep, bone-aching exhaustion in its wake. We have a private lounge ready for you in the terminal, Cole continued, and we are already arranging for you to be placed on the next available flight to London, a first-class suite, of course. We will handle all of your luggage and arrangements. You won't have to lift a finger. Mr. Peterson from 2D, who had been listening to the entire exchange, leaned across the aisle. Excuse me, sir, he said to Cole. I'm the passenger whose headphones were missing. I just want to go on record and say that what that flight attendant did to this young lady was appalling. Absolutely disgraceful. I am happy to provide a statement to that effect. Cole turned to him. Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I appreciate that. A representative will be speaking with you and several other passengers once we are in the terminal. The deplaning process began, a slow, grumbling exodus of inconvenienced travelers. As Imani was discreetly escorted off the plane first, ahead of everyone else, she passed the rear galley. She caught one last glimpse of Brenda Jenkins. The flight attendant was slumped against a counter, her face in her hands. The crisp uniform, once a symbol of her power and authority, now looked like a costume on a defeated woman. Flight GV-212, which should have been soaring over the Atlantic, sat silent and empty at the gate, grounded. A multi-million-dollar aircraft, a crew of 12, and over 250 passengers had been brought to a complete standstill, all because one woman's prejudice had collided with a power she could not possibly comprehend. The karma was just beginning to gather speed. The sterile quiet of the Orion Holdings administrative wing at JFK was a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding in the main terminal, where hundreds of Global Voyager passengers were scrambling to rebook. Inside a windowless conference room, Brenda Jenkins sat across a polished mahogany table from Jonathan Cole, the corporate attorney, and Sarah Miller, the station manager. A third person, a stone-faced woman from Human Resources named Maria Flores, sat in the corner, taking meticulous notes. The bravado was gone. The anger was gone. All that remained was a desperate, panicked desire for self-preservation. I feel this is all a terrible misunderstanding, Brenda began, her voice raspy. My only concern was for company property. The young lady, Miss Hayes, seemed out of place. It was a simple mistake in judgment, given the circumstances. Jonathan Cole steepled his fingers, his expression unreadable. A mistake in judgment, Miss Jenkins? Let's walk through that. You judged that a passenger in a paid first-class seat was out of place. On what basis? Her age? Her clothing? It was just a feeling, Brenda stammered. A gut instinct. I've been flying for 22 years. You develop an eye for these things. An eye for what, precisely? Cole pressed, his voice soft but relentless. An eye for spotting paying customers who don't fit your personal demographic profile for first class. No, that's not what I meant, Brenda said, her voice rising. It wasn't about race. I'm not a racist. Sarah Miller slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a list of names and dates. Brenda, this is your complaint history. Over the past 10 years, you have had 14 informal passenger complaints filed against you for rude or dismissive behavior. Of those 14, 12 were filed by people of color. All of them were dismissed after a brief review by your direct supervisor, David Chen. Do you see a pattern here? Brenda stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She remembered a few of them vaguely, an argument over overhead bin space with a Latino family, a complaint about slow drink service from a black couple. At the time, she'd dismissed them as overly sensitive passengers. Her manager, David Chen, had always backed her up. "Don't worry about it, Brenda," he'd say. "You know how some people are. Just keep up the good work." Now, seen in this light, compiled into a single damning list, the pattern was undeniable and horrifying. "David always said," she began weakly. "What Mr. Chen said is part of a separate, and I assure you, very serious investigation," Cole interjected smoothly. "Right now we are concerned with your actions today. You didn't just have a feeling, you acted on it. You confiscated property from Miss Hayes's suite. Then you publicly accused her of theft, a crime. You shouted at her. You humiliated a 17-year-old girl who was, by all accounts, sitting quietly and reading a book." He paused, letting the weight of the summary sink in. "And then there's the matter of the missing headphones from seat 2D. He tapped a key on his laptop and turned the screen towards her. It was a pre-flight maintenance log from the ground crew. A single line was highlighted. Seat 2D, headset unit non-operational, removed for replacement. Replacement unit not available before departure. Logged for London maintenance crew. "The headphones from 2D were never there, Brenda," Sarah Miller said, her voice flat. "They were removed by the ground crew before any passengers boarded the plane. You built your entire tirade, your entire public humiliation of a child, on a fantasy. You were so eager to prove your gut instinct right that you didn't bother to do the one thing your job requires: verify the facts." The room fell silent. The maintenance log was the final nail in the coffin of Brenda's defense. There was no misunderstanding. There was no mistake in judgment. There was only a clear, indisputable sequence of events fueled by deep-seated bias. Brenda finally broke. The tears she had tried so hard to hold back now streamed down her face, carving path through her carefully applied makeup. "Please," she whispered, the word choked with desperation. 22 years. This job is my life, my whole life. I'm a few years from retirement. My pension." Maria Flores, the HR representative, finally spoke, her voice devoid of any emotion. "Ms. Jenkins, your employment with Global Voyager Airlines is terminated, effective immediately, for gross misconduct. This includes violations of our anti-harassment policy, our code of conduct, and creating a hostile environment for a passenger. Due to the nature of the termination, gross misconduct, you will be forfeiting your company pension and all post-employment benefits." The words, "forfeiting your company pension," sucked all the air out of the room. 22 years of service, of red-eye flights, of dealing with unruly passengers, of sacrificing holidays and weekends. All of it, erased in an instant. The financial bedrock of her future was gone. "You can't do that," Brenda sobbed, shaking her head in disbelief. "You can't take my pension." "We can, and we are," Jonathan Cole said, his tone final. He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "A security officer will escort you from the premises. Your personal belongings will be collected from your locker and mailed to you. You are not to have any contact with any Global Voyager or Orion Holdings employees. If you do, we will consider it harassment and act accordingly." As a uniformed security guard entered the room, the full, crushing reality of her situation descended upon Brenda Jenkins. She hadn't just lost her job, she had lost her past and her future. She had become a pariah. And as she was led out of the room, a disgraced employee stripped of her dignity and her livelihood, another story was just beginning to take shape online. A passenger from seat 4A, a tech blogger who had filmed the latter half of Brenda's tirade on his phone, had just uploaded the video to his Twitter account. He tagged Global Voyager Airlines and added a simple, devastating caption: "On GVA Flight 2212 at JFK, flight attendant has a complete meltdown, screaming at a young black girl and accusing her of theft. They just deplaned us all. Unbelievable. At Global Voyager, now flying while black." The video, shaky and muffled, was raw and damning. It showed Brenda's contorted face, her pointing finger, her voice raised in fury. It showed Imani's calm, defiant posture. Within an hour, it would have 10,000 views. By the next morning, it would have millions. Brenda Jenkins's private unraveling was about to become a very public spectacle. By the time Imani Hayes was settling into her new suite on the 10 p.m. flight to London, the video of her confrontation with Brenda Jenkins was a raging inferno on social media. The hashtag #OdgaFlyingWhileBlack was trending globally, with Brenda Jenkins and Global Voyager right alongside it. News outlets, from online blogs to major international networks, had picked up the story. The clip was being played on a loop, each viewing adding another layer of outrage to the public discourse. Brenda Jenkins was no longer just a terminated employee. She was Airline Karen, a global symbol of racism and entitlement. Her name, face, and 22-year career were being dissected and condemned by millions of strangers. Her life was no longer her own. For Marcus Hayes and the executive team at Orion Holdings, the situation had morphed from a critical internal incident into a full-blown public relations catastrophe. The grounding of the plane, meant to be a decisive surgical intervention, was now being framed as part of the story's climax. The narrative was powerful and simple. A courageous teen stood up to a racist flight attendant, made one call, and the airline was forced to ground an entire plane to deal with it. Inside the Orion Holdings war room in Manhattan, an emergency meeting was in its 4th hour. The mood was grim. "The initial story is out of our control," said Rebecca Shaw, the head of public relations, pointing to a screen filled with negative headlines. "Brenda Jenkins is the villain. Imani Hayes is the hero. We, Global Voyager, are the incompetent, negligent entity that allowed this to happen on our watch." Marcus Hayes, who had joined by video conference, listened intently. His face was like stone. "What's our move, Rebecca?" "We have to get ahead of it. We can't be defensive. We need to be proactive, transparent, and overwhelmingly apologetic," she said, outlining a multi-pronged strategy. First, a public statement from our CEO, James Harrison. Not a press release, a video statement. He needs to look into the camera and apologize directly to Imani Hayes and her family. He needs to call what happened by its name: racism. No weasel words. "Legal will have a fit," someone muttered. "Legal works for the company, and right now the company is bleeding," Rebecca shot back. Second, we publicly confirm Brenda Jenkins has been terminated. We also announce the suspension of her supervisor, David Chen, pending a full investigation into how her previous behavior was repeatedly ignored. This shows we're not just scapegoating one employee, we're looking at the systemic failure. James Harrison, the CEO, a man who usually projected an aura of unshakable calm, nodded his assent. "Agreed. What else?" "Third, and this is the most critical part," Rebecca continued, "we need to reach out to the Hayes family and offer a settlement. But it can't look like hush money. It has to be framed as a commitment to change. We propose a multi-million-dollar donation in Imani Hayes' name to a non-profit of her choice, one focused on promoting diversity and inclusion in the tech industry. It honors her. It aligns with her purpose for traveling, and it turns our apology into tangible action." Marcus finally spoke, his voice resonating with quiet authority. That is an acceptable path forward. But it is not enough. This cannot be about PR. It has to be about a fundamental, verifiable change in our corporate culture. I want a complete overhaul of our in-flight service training with a new curriculum designed by leading experts on implicit bias. I want a new, anonymous and robust reporting system for employee misconduct, managed by a third-party ethics firm, so that a manager like David Chen can never sweep complaints under the rug again. The executives in the room were stunned by the force and scope of his demands. This wasn't just crisis management. This was a revolution. While the corporation grappled with its own soul, the personal fallout was devastating. David Chen, Brenda's manager, was called at home at 2:00 a.m. and told he was suspended without pay. He was a 30-year veteran of the airline, a man who had built his career on not rocking the boat, on making problems disappear. His method was simple: back his senior staff, dismiss passenger complaints as he said, she said, and maintain the status quo. In protecting Brenda for years, he had enabled her behavior, and now he was inextricably linked to her downfall. His career at Global Voyager was over. He just didn't know it yet. For Brenda, the night was a living hell. Her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications from news alerts and messages from horrified friends and family. Her address, gleaned from public records, had been posted on a dark corner of the internet. A local news van was already parked across the street from her modest suburban home. She had unplugged her landline, but she couldn't unplug the world. She sat in her darkened living room, the glow of the television on mute, showing her own enraged face over and over. She saw the comments online, calling her a monster, a racist, a disgrace. In her mind, the narrative was so different. She was a dedicated employee, a rule follower. She had a bad day, made a mistake. Did she deserve this? To have her entire life dismantled and destroyed in a matter of hours? The hard, unforgiving answer that echoed back in the silence was, yes. The karma wasn't just that she was fired. It was that the ugly prejudice she had harbored and acted upon for years had been captured, magnified, and broadcast to the entire world. There was nowhere to hide. The firestorm she had ignited with a single shout was now consuming her whole world, leaving nothing but ash behind. 3 weeks after Flight GV-212 was grounded on the tarmac at JFK, the aftershocks were still reshaping the lives of everyone involved. The incident had ceased to be a mere news story. It had become a cultural touchstone, a viral parable for a polarized age. The reckoning was not a single event, but a cascade of consequences that swept through corporate boardrooms, suburban homes, and the hopeful heart of a young innovator. The first and most public act of contrition came from James Harrison, the CEO of Global Voyager Airlines. Forsaking a sterile press release, he appeared in a starkly lit video, seated not behind a grand desk, but on a simple stool. He spoke directly to the camera, his face etched with a gravity that felt genuine. He named Imani Hayes, apologized to her and her family without reservation, and then he uttered the word that corporate legal teams dread. What happened to Miss Hayes was not a customer service failure. It was an act of racism, enabled by a corporate culture that has been blind to its own biases. The blindness ends today. The video was a sensation. Global Voyager's stock dipped for 48 hours, then rebounded stronger than before, as investors rewarded the company's radical transparency and decisive leadership. Behind the scenes, the house cleaning was brutal and swift. The investigation into David Chen, Brenda's longtime manager, became a case study in negligent leadership. In his interview with Orion Holdings' Internal Affairs, the 30-year veteran was belligerent. "My job is to manage crew schedules and flight readiness, not to be the feelings police," he argued, his face flushed. Brenda was a senior attendant, dependable, punctual. If a passenger had a problem, I took my employee's side. That's loyalty. That's how you run a team. He was incapable of seeing that his loyalty was a form of complicity, a managerial rot that had allowed the poison of prejudice to fester for years. His termination letter cited his systematic failure to investigate and address credible complaints, thereby creating significant legal and reputational risk for the company. He left the building that day, a bitter man, a relic of a bygone era of management, uncomprehending of the new world that had just dismissed him. In place of the old ways, Marcus Hayes's demands were being implemented under a program formally titled the GVA Compass Initiative. It was a complete overhaul of in-flight training, developed in partnership with leading sociologists and diversity consultants. Every single one of Global Voyager's 12,000 flight attendants was required to undergo an intensive 2-day course involving implicit bias testing, de-escalation role-playing based on real incidents, and cultural sensitivity training. The resistance from some veteran employees was palpable. Grumblings about woke nonsense and sensitivity training echoed in crew lounges. But the message from the top was uncompromising: adapt or leave. While Global Voyager was desperately trying to redeem itself, Brenda Jenkins was living in a self-made prison of infamy. Her name had become a verb, her face a meme. She sold her home through a proxy, taking a lowball offer for a quick, anonymous sale, and fled to a small town in the Midwest where no one knew her face. But the internet knew. She tried applying for jobs: an office manager, a retail clerk, a receptionist. Inevitably, a background check or a simple Google search would reveal her identity. One interviewer, a young woman barely out of college, looked up from her screen and said with cold recognition, "Oh, you're her." The interview ended abruptly. Brenda's karma was not merely the loss of her job and pension, it was the stripping away of her identity. For 22 years, she was Brenda, the senior flight attendant, a person of authority and control. Now she was just Airline Karen, a digital ghost doomed to wander the earth in shame. The most tragic part of her ruin was her inability to comprehend its source. In the lonely quiet of her small rental apartment, she didn't reflect on her prejudice. Instead, she nursed a burning resentment for the entitled teenager and the cancel culture that had, in her view, victimized her. She saw herself not as the perpetrator of a hateful act, but as the casualty of an overly sensitive world, a conviction that locked her away from any chance of redemption or peace. In stark, glorious contrast, Imani Hayes was ascending. She arrived in London, shaken but resolute, and the night before her keynote address, she rewrote her entire speech. She stepped onto the stage at the Future Innovators Tech Summit and looked out at a sea of expectant faces. She began not by talking about neural networks or machine learning, but by talking about systems, human and digital, and the biases coded within them. "An algorithm is only as good as the data it's trained on," she said, her voice clear and strong. "If we train our technology on biased data, it will produce biased results. And if we train our society on biased ideas, it will produce biased people. The solution is the same for both. We have to consciously, deliberately, and constantly work to de-bias the system, whether that system is running on silicon or in our own souls." She then seamlessly linked this powerful idea back to her original topic, and by the time she finished, the entire auditorium was on its feet, a thunderous, sustained ovation that was about much more than a single speech. It was an acknowledgement of her brilliance, her resilience, and her grace. The Hayes family, true to their word, directed the entirety of the $5 million settlement into a new endowment called the Imani Hayes Initiative for Inclusive Innovation at Black Girls Code. The CEO of the non-profit released a statement saying, "This incredible gift will allow us to launch 3 new chapters and provide scholarships for over 1,000 young women, creating a new generation of leaders who will build a more equitable technological future for us all." The story of Flight 212 lingered in the public consciousness, a testament to its profound themes. Mr. Peterson's op-ed was syndicated in dozens of papers, and he received hundreds of emails from people who said it forced them to confront their own assumptions. Other airlines, while silent publicly, began quietly reviewing their own policies, terrified of having their own Brenda Jenkins moment. The grounded plane had become a symbol. It represented a necessary, disruptive pause, a moment when business as usual was forced to stop, to confront an injustice that could no longer be ignored. For a few chaotic hours, one young woman's dignity was deemed more important than a multi-million-dollar flight operation. And in that moment, something essential had shifted. Imani Hayes, a 17-year-old girl with a book and a boarding pass, had not set out to be a hero, but by refusing to be made small, she had inadvertently taught an entire industry and a watching world a vital lesson about the soaring cost of prejudice and the priceless value of respect. The story of Imani Hayes and Brenda Jenkins is a stark and powerful reminder that our actions, especially those fueled by prejudice, have consequences that can ripple out in ways we can never predict. One person's quiet dignity in the face of ugly aggression became a catalyst for massive corporate change, while another's lifetime of unchecked bias led to a swift and total downfall. It proves that true power isn't about a uniform or a title. It's about integrity. This wasn't just an airline drama. It was a microcosm of our society, where battles for respect and equality are fought every single day in places big and small. If this story resonated with you and you believe in the power of accountability, please give this video a thumbs up to help spread the message. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true-life stories where karma delivers its verdict and justice eventually finds its way. Thank you for listening.